the massive space station called Unity Prime, floated in the darkness between stars like a giant metal flower, its metal petals stretched out for kilometers in every direction, and each petal held thousands of living spaces for the many alien species that called this place home. The station was bigger than most moons, and it glowed with soft blue lights that could be seen from very far away inside. The Great Council Hall Ambassador Kim Tae-ho sat alone at a small table marked with the symbol of Earth. He wore a simple black suit that looked very plain compared to the colorful robes and strange clothing worn by the alien delegates around him. His hands rested calmly on the table, but his dark eyes moved constantly as he watched the hundreds of creatures filling the enormous room. The hall itself was a wonder to see. It rose up like the inside of a giant dome, with seats arranged in circles that went higher and higher toward the curved ceiling. Each circle held different types of aliens, and the sight was both beautiful and frightening at the same time. There were tall, thin beings that looked like walking trees. There were short, round creatures covered in fur. There were things that floated in the air without touching the ground, and others that seemed to be made of living metal. Tae-ho had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now, and he still felt amazed by the variety of life in the galaxy. But today was different. Today he could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. The aliens were not just meeting to discuss trade routes or mining rights. Today they were here to decide the fate of humanity. The Sector delegate stood up first. His reptilian body was covered in green scales that caught the light as he moved. His long tail swished behind him as he spoke in a voice that sounded like gravel falling down a metal chute. He complained that humans were expanding too fast into space. They were building colonies on too many worlds, and they were not asking permission from the older species. First, next came the wealthy representative. This creature looked like a jellyfish made of pure light that floated 3 feet above the floor. Its voice came from speakers built into its chair, because it could not make sounds the way other beings did. The wealthy worried about human military technology. They said humans were building weapons that were too powerful and too dangerous for such a young species to possess. Then the Hybren speaker clicked and buzzed as it talked. This insect-like being was as tall as 2 humans standing on top of each other. Its 4 arms moved constantly as it spoke. The Hybren feared human emotions. They said humans were too angry, too sad, too happy, and too unpredictable to be trusted as allies in the galaxy. One by one more aliens stood up to speak against humanity. The blue-skinned Mortel said humans asked too many questions. The crystal beings called Silinary complained that humans wanted to study everything instead of just accepting what they were told. The gas creatures known as Vapor claimed that humans thought too much about the future instead of being happy with things as they were. Atea listened to every word without changing his expression. He had heard these complaints before, but never all at once and never with such anger behind them. He began to understand that this was not just a discussion. This was a trial, and humanity was the one being judged. Hours passed, and still the aliens kept talking. Each species seemed to have something bad to say about humans. Some complaints were small, like humans being too loud or eating strange foods. Other complaints were more serious, like humans refusing to follow certain galactic laws or humans making friends with species that other aliens did not like. Finally, the council chairman called for order. Mordic was taller than any other being in the room. His blue skin was so dark it was almost black, and his 4 arms ended in hands that had too many fingers. His voice was deep and powerful enough to fill the entire hall without any machines to make it louder. Mordic announced that the council had made its decision after months of debate. The vote had been close but clear. Humanity would be allowed to remain in the galaxy, but only under strict conditions. These conditions were not suggestions or requests. They were demands that must be accepted completely, or humanity would face the combined military might of every other species in the galaxy. The first condition was that humans could have no more than 50 colonies in total. They would have to abandon their newer settlements and move everyone back to older, more established worlds. The second condition was that human military forces could have no more than 100 ships, and those ships could carry only basic weapons for defense against pirates and raiders. The third condition was the hardest to accept. Humanity would have to turn over all their advanced technology to the Galactic Council for review and approval. This included their fastest computers, their strongest materials, Their most efficient engines and especially their newest weapons any technology that other species considered too dangerous would be destroyed. The fourth condition was that every human world would have alien observers living on them. These observers would watch everything humans did and report back to the council about any activities that might be considered threatening or inappropriate. The observers would have the power to stop any human project. They did not like the final condition was that humanity would have to pay huge amounts of money, metals, and resources to the other species as payment for being allowed to stay in the galaxy. This payment would continue every year for the next 500 years, and the amount would increase. If human population or wealth grew too much, the hall became very quiet after Mordic finished speaking all. The alien delegates turned to look at Taiho, waiting to see how the human representative would respond. Many of them expected him to beg or try to negotiate for better terms. Some thought he might get angry and make threats that would only make things worse for his species. Taiho stood up slowly from his chair. His movement was smooth and controlled like a dancer or a fighter who had practiced the same motion thousands of times. He looked around the hall, taking time to meet the eyes of delegates from dozens of different species. Some of those eyes were curious, others were hostile, and many were simply indifferent to whatever happened to humanity. When Taiho finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. He did not shout or plead or make grand speeches. Instead, he said something that surprised everyone in the room. He thanked the council for making their position so clear and honest. He said it was helpful to know exactly where humanity stood in their opinion. Then Taiho did something that would be remembered throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small communication device that looked like an ordinary human telephone. He activated it with a simple touch and sent a message that contained only 2 words. The message went out instantly, traveling faster than light to reach Earth and every human colony in the galaxy. The 2 words were simple, but they would change everything. The first word was horizon, and the second word was now. Every human in the galaxy knew what those words meant, because they had been preparing for this day for many years. They had hoped it would never come, but they had planned for it just in case. Taiho put the device back in his jacket and looked once more around the hall filled with hundreds of alien beings. He smiled slightly, but there was no humor in his expression, only a kind of sad certainty about what was going to happen next. He told the council that humanity rejected their ultimatum completely. They would not accept any of the conditions, and they would not pay any tribute or accept any observers. The aliens exploded into noise that sounded like a thunderstorm filled with animal cries and machine sounds. They had expected many different responses, but not this complete rejection. Some delegates stood up and made threatening gestures. Others activated their own communication devices to contact their home governments. Many simply stared in shock at the human who had just declared his species' independence from galactic authority. But Taiho was already walking toward the exit. His part in this meeting was finished, and he had delivered his message. The real response from humanity was just beginning, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The aliens thought they knew what humans were capable of, but they were about to learn that they had never seen humanity when it stopped trying to be polite and diplomatic. As Taiho reached the door, he turned back one last time to look at the chaos he was leaving behind. In 72 hours, everything would change, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The message from Ambassador Kim Taiho reached Earth in less than 3 hours, traveling through the quantum communication network that connected all human colonies. The 2 words horizon now appeared on screens in government buildings, military bases, and research facilities across human space within minutes. Every human leader knew that diplomacy had failed, and it was time to begin the greatest evacuation in galactic history. President Park Min-ho stood in the emergency assembly hall in New Geneva, looking out at representatives from 47 human worlds. The massive auditorium was packed with people who had traveled from every corner of human space to attend this crucial meeting. Their faces showed worry but also determination, because they had all known this day might come. Min-ho was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, but today his expression was harder than steel. He had spent 30 years in politics, always trying to find peaceful solutions to problems, but now he faced a situation where talking would not work. The aliens had made their choice, and now humanity would make theirs. The President activated the holographic display that filled the center of the auditorium, showing a map of human space with all 47 colonies marked in blue dots. He explained the alien ultimatum in simple, clear words that everyone could understand. The galaxy wanted humanity to become servants, giving up their freedom, their strength, and their future to make alien species feel more comfortable. Response from the colonial representatives was immediate and unanimous. Every single world voted to reject the alien demands, even though they knew it might mean war with species that had weapons and ships beyond. Counting the vote was not even close. It was 47-0 with no abstentions, because when it came to choosing between freedom and slavery, humanity would always choose freedom. But the plan that Minho revealed next surprised even some of the representatives who thought they knew all of humanity's secrets. Instead of preparing for a hopeless war against impossible odds, humanity would do something that had never been attempted before. They would leave the galaxy entirely, taking their people, their technology, and their dreams to a place where no alien species could follow. The operation was called New Horizon, and it had been planned for over 20 years by the best minds in human space, deep in secret facilities beyond the rim of the galaxy. Human engineers had been building something incredible. A fleet of ships so advanced and so large that they could carry the entire human population away from the Milky Way galaxy to start fresh somewhere else on the colony world of New Bizon. Commander Lee Soman watched as the evacuation began. The planet had been home to 5 million humans for almost 50 years, and now all of them had to leave within weeks. Giant transport ships landed continuously in the capital city and smaller towns, carrying away families who had lived there for generations. Was a career military officer who had served on a dozen different worlds, but she had never seen anything like this evacuation. Entire factories were being taken apart and loaded onto ships piece by piece. Hospitals were being emptied of patients and equipment. Schools were being stripped of everything from desks to computer systems. Even the parks and gardens were being harvested for seeds and soil samples. The most amazing part was how calm everyone remained. Children played games while their parents packed belongings. Elderly people told stories about the early days of the colony, while younger adults organized the complex logistics of moving an entire civilization. Workers sang songs while they dismantled the fusion reactors that had powered their cities for decades. In orbit above New Bizon, the transport ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Each one was the size of a small city, capable of carrying 500,000 people in comfort for journeys that might last years or even decades. The ships had their own farms, their own factories, their own schools and hospitals. They were not just vehicles, but complete mobile worlds. Meanwhile, in the hidden shipyards beyond the galaxy's edge, Dr. Choi Min-soo put the finishing touches on humanity's greatest achievement. The scientist had spent his entire career working on projects that pushed the boundaries of physics and engineering, but this was his masterpiece, a technology that would change the rules of space travel forever. The aliens monitoring human space could see the massive evacuation taking place, but they misunderstood what they were watching. Their spies reported that humans were moving military assets around, probably preparing for some kind of desperate last stand against superior alien forces. The alien intelligence officers had no idea that humanity was not retreating, but preparing for something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization on Earth itself. The evacuation was even more dramatic. The birth world of humanity had been home to 12 billion people for thousands of years, and now every single one of them was leaving. Giant generation ships larger than mountains descended from orbit to collect the population of entire continents. The ships were so big that they created their own weather patterns as they moved through the atmosphere. The process was not random or panicked, but carefully organized over years of planning. Every person knew exactly which ship they would board and when. Every family had been assigned living quarters in the mobile cities that would be their homes for the foreseeable future. Every important piece of human knowledge and culture had been copied and stored in the ships. Databases, ancient monuments, and historical sites were carefully dismantled and loaded onto the ships so that future generations would remember where they came from. The pyramids of Giza were taken apart stone by stone and numbered for reconstruction. The Statue of Liberty was wrapped in protective materials and loaded onto a transport. The Great Wall of China was photographed and measured so precisely that it could be rebuilt exactly as it had been, but the most precious cargo was not made of stone or metal, but of DNA samples from every form of life on Earth. Millions of plant and animal species were preserved in special storage facilities aboard the generation ships, ensuring that humanity would not lose the biological heritage of their homeworld when they left the galaxy behind. The alien observers watching this evacuation from their monitoring stations were confused and increasingly worried. They had expected humanity to either surrender or prepare for war, but instead humans seemed to be abandoning everything they had built over centuries of expansion. Some alien analysts suggested that humans were more cowardly than expected and were fleeing rather than fighting, but a few alien intelligence officers were beginning to suspect something else. They noticed that the human evacuation was too organized, too complete, and too calm for a species that was simply running away in fear. The energy readings from the ships were also unusual, showing power levels that should have been impossible with known technology. As weeks passed and the evacuation continued, the aliens began to realize that they might have made a serious mistake. The humans were not just leaving a few colonies or retreating to their core worlds. They were removing every trace of their civilization from the galaxy as if they had never existed at all. The last human ship to leave the Milky Way galaxy was a small courier vessel carrying Ambassador Kim Taiho himself. He had remained on Unity Prime to handle final diplomatic matters, but now his job was finished. As his ship accelerated toward the void between galaxies, he looked back one last time at the stars that had been humanity's home for so long behind him. The galaxy continued its ancient dance of spinning stars and orbiting planets, but something fundamental had changed. The most unpredictable and dangerous species in galactic history had vanished completely, leaving behind only empty worlds and unanswered questions. The aliens had gotten what they thought they wanted, but they were about to discover that sometimes getting what you want is the worst thing that can happen to you. In the deep void between galaxies where no stars had ever shown, humanity's greatest achievement finally revealed itself to the universe. The generation ship New Earth was bigger than any moon and more beautiful than any world. It floated in the darkness like a jewel made of metal and light, surrounded by hundreds of other ships that formed the most incredible fleet in the history of space. Travel Captain Han Jisu stood on the bridge of the New Earth, looking out through massive windows at the fleet that stretched as far as the eye could see. Each ship was unique in design, but all of them shared the same impossible elegance. They moved through space without engines that anyone could see. They generated power without fuel that could be measured. They supported life in ways that made planets seem primitive and limited. Bridge itself was a wonder that would have amazed alien scientists if they could have seen it. The walls were made of materials that shifted color based on the emotions of the people inside them. The floor felt solid but could become transparent to show the stars below. The ceiling displayed information in patterns of light that somehow made perfect sense to human minds, but would have been meaningless to alien observers. Dr. Choi Min-soo walked onto the bridge carrying a small device that looked like a simple black cube, but contained enough computing power to run an entire star system. He was an old man now, with white hair and wrinkled hands, but his eyes still burned with the excitement of someone who had spent his life pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The doctor began explaining to the assembled fleet commanders how humanity had achieved what the galaxy believed was impossible, while alien species had limited their technology to maintain balance and prevent any one race from becoming too powerful. Humans had never stopped trying to understand the deepest secrets of the universe. The breakthrough had come from studying the quantum foam that existed in the space between atoms. By learning to manipulate these tiny fluctuations in reality itself, humans had developed technology that seemed like magic to anyone who did not understand the science behind it. Every ship in the fleet was partially existing outside normal spacetime, which explained how they could travel instantly across vast distances and why alien weapons would pass harmlessly through them. The fusion reactors that powered the ships did not just burn hydrogen and helium, but actually converted matter directly into energy at the quantum level. A single reactor the size of a house could power an entire planet for centuries without running out of fuel. The artificial gravity systems were so perfect that humans born in space would never know they were not standing on solid ground. But the most incredible achievement was the ships themselves. Each vessel was a complete ecosystem with weather systems that created rain and snow agricultural zones that could feed millions of people and manufacturing facilities that could build anything needed from the basic elements of the periodic table. The ships could combine together to form structures larger than solar systems or separate to explore different regions of space. The new Earth alone carried 50 million humans in cities that were more beautiful and comfortable than anything that had ever existed on any planet. Parks and forests stretched for kilometers inside the ship, complete with rivers and lakes that supported thousands of species of Earth animals. Children who had been born during the journey played in playgrounds that existed in zero gravity one day and full Earth gravity the next. Back in the Milky Way galaxy, alien sensors were detecting strange energy readings from the void beyond their borders. Intelligence officer Yoon Seung-yeon worked undercover on an alien monitoring station, pretending to be a maintenance worker while actually gathering information about alien reactions to humanity disappearance. The aliens were becoming increasingly nervous as their instruments picked up massive power signatures unlike anything in their databases. The readings suggested technology that was not just advanced but completely revolutionary, as if someone had discovered new laws of physics that made the old rules meaningless. Ngonu smiled as he watched alien scientists struggle to understand what they were seeing. Their most sensitive equipment could detect the human fleet but could not determine what the ships were made of, how they were powered, or how they had traveled so far so quickly. The energy patterns made no sense according to galactic science. The Galactic Council met in the emergency session for the first time since humanity had rejected their ultimatum. Chairman Mordick demanded answers from his intelligence chiefs, but they had nothing useful to report. The humans had simply vanished from known space, leaving behind empty colonies and abandoned outposts. But something was definitely out there in the void between galaxies, something big enough and powerful enough to register on sensors from millions of light years away. The readings were getting stronger, which meant whatever was producing them was either growing larger or moving closer to the galaxy. Some alien scientists suggested that the energy signatures might be natural phenomena like colliding black holes or exploding stars, but others pointed out that the patterns were too regular, too organized to be anything except artificial technology. The implications were terrifying, because if humans had developed such advanced capabilities in secret, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about them was wrong. The wealthy delegates were particularly worried because their species specialized in energy manipulation, and they could recognize the signatures of incredibly sophisticated power systems. The readings suggested fusion reactions that were thousands of times more efficient than anything the galaxy had ever achieved. The sector military leaders were demanding immediate action. They wanted to send fleets to investigate the energy sources and eliminate any threat before it could grow stronger. But other species urged caution, pointing out that they still did not know what they were dealing with. As days passed, the energy readings continued to grow stronger and more complex. The pattern suggested not just one massive object, but hundreds or even thousands of separate sources, all moving in coordinated formations. The implications were staggering, because it meant that humanity had not just developed new technology, but had built an entire civilization around it. Dr. Choi Min-soo stood in his laboratory aboard the new Earth, working on the final preparations for humanity's next move. The quantum manipulation technology that powered their ships could do much more than provide transportation and energy. It could reshape matter at the subatomic level, allowing them to transform entire planets or move star systems to new locations. The old man looked at readouts that showed the position of every major alien world in the Milky Way galaxy. Within hours, humanity would make contact again, but this time they would not be asking for permission or seeking acceptance. They would be offering the galaxy a choice that would determine the future of every species unknown. Space Captain Han Jisu received the final authorization codes from Earth. government in exile and began broadcasting the recall signal to human agents still operating in alien space. The time for hiding was over and the time for revelation had begun. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity could accomplish when they stopped trying to play by someone else's rules in monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. Alien observers watched in growing alarm as the energy readings from the void suddenly doubled, then doubled again. Something was coming back toward the Milky Way, and it was bigger and more powerful than anything that had ever existed in galactic space. The old order was about to end, and what would replace it was beyond anything the aliens could imagine. Humanity had left the galaxy as refugees, but they were returning as something else entirely, something that would change the meaning of power and possibility forever. The silence from human space had lasted exactly 100 days. The Galactic Council had grown, comfortable believing that humanity had finally accepted their place as inferiors, who had been frightened away by superior alien power. The delegates had returned to their normal routine of arguing about trade routes and mining rights while congratulating themselves on solving the human problem so easily. Then, without any warning or advance notice, a single ship appeared in the middle of the Great Council chamber during their regular weekly meeting. The vessel simply materialized in the center of the hall where moments before there had been only empty air surrounded by hundreds of shocked alien delegates who could not understand what they were seeing. The ship was small and elegant, about the size of a luxury transport, but it glowed with soft white light that seemed to come from the hull itself rather than from any external source. The design was unlike anything in galactic databases, with smooth curves that flowed like water frozen in metal and no visible engines, weapons, or communication arrays. What made the appearance truly impossible was that the ship had somehow passed through the station's shields and hull without causing any damage or setting off any alarms. The most advanced security systems in the galaxy had not even detected the ship's approach until it was already inside the supposedly impenetrable council chamber. Ambassador Lee Jin-yuk stepped out of the ship through an opening that appeared in the hull without any sound of hatches or airlocks. He was a young man compared to Kim Taiho, with black hair and calm dark eyes that seemed to see everything around him without judgment or fear. He wore a simple black uniform with no rank insignia, no weapons, and no visible technology. The alien delegates sat in stunned silence as Jin-yuk walked calmly across the chamber floor toward the speaker's platform. His footsteps echoed in the vast space, but somehow the sound was comforting rather than threatening. The human moved with the fluid grace of someone who was completely confident in his abilities and completely at peace with whatever was about to happen. Jin-yuk reached the platform and looked around the chamber, taking time to meet the eyes of delegates from dozens of different species. Some of those aliens were the same ones who had voted for the ultimatum that drove humanity from the galaxy. Others were newer representatives who had only heard stories about the mysterious humans who had vanished into the void. When the human ambassador finally spoke, his voice carried clearly through the chamber without amplification systems. Yet somehow every being present could hear him perfectly. Regardless of their species' hearing capabilities, his words were simple and direct, delivered in the tone someone might use to discuss the weather or ask for directions. Humanity offered the galaxy a new proposal, he said. Every alien species that had voted for the original ultimatum would have exactly 72 hours to begin evacuating their homeworlds. Those worlds would be relocated to better positions in the galaxy with improved star systems, perfect environmental conditions, and resources. Beyond their current imagination, the aliens could choose to accept this gift and begin a new relationship with humanity, based on mutual cooperation and shared growth, or they could refuse the offer and face consequences that would demonstrate just how much the balance of power had shifted since humanity left the galaxy. The chamber erupted into chaos as hundreds of alien voices began shouting questions, demands, and threats all at the same time. The noise was incredible, with sounds ranging from electronic buzzing to animal roars to mechanical grinding, but somehow none of it seemed to affect Jin-yuk, who waited patiently for the uproar to die down. Chairman Mordek used his authority to restore order, demanding that the human explain how such impossible things could be accomplished, what technology could move entire planets, How did humanity gain the right to make demands of species that had existed for millions of years longer? What gave them the power to threaten the established order of the Galaxy? Smiled slightly, but there was no humor in his expression. Only a kind of gentle sadness for beings who still did not understand how completely their world had changed. Instead of explaining, he simply showed them the truth. In a way that left no room for doubt or denial, with a simple gesture, the human activated a holographic display that filled the entire council chamber. The aliens found themselves looking at their own star systems as seen from vantage points that should have been impossible to achieve. The images were so clear and detailed that they could see individual continents on their homeworlds and individual ships in their defense fleets, but what truly shocked the delegates was that each image also showed human vessels positioned near every major alien world. The ships were not threatening or hostile in appearance, but they were undeniably there, waiting in positions that demonstrated complete mastery of space travel and stealth technology. The display showed technical readouts that proved human vessels could manipulate matter at the quantum level, allowing them to move planets, relocate entire star systems, and reshape space itself according to their will. The energy requirements for such feats were beyond anything the galaxy had ever imagined, yet the humans were accomplishing them as easily as other species might move furniture. The Sector delegate, who had been one of the loudest voices demanding human submission, jumped up from his seat and accused Jinuk of creating fake images to frighten the council. But even as he spoke, his own communication device was receiving urgent messages from Sector Prime, reporting unknown vessels in their home system. Similar reports began flooding in from every species represented in the chamber. Their homeworlds were indeed surrounded by human ships that had appeared without warning and without being detected by even the most sophisticated sensor networks. The implications were staggering because it meant humanity had been watching and could have acted at any time. The Velfi representative asked the question that everyone was thinking. If humans possessed such overwhelming technological superiority, why had they ever bothered with diplomacy? Why had they accepted the council ultimatum instead of simply taking what they wanted through? Forcha Jinuk answered that humanity had hoped to find a peaceful solution to the conflicts between species. They had believed that different forms of life could coexist and learn from each other without one group dominating all the others. But the galaxy had chosen fear and limitation over growth and cooperation. The ultimatum had forced humanity to evolve beyond the need for permission or acceptance from other species. They had transcended the normal limitations of physics and biology, becoming something new that could not be contained by the old rules. The galaxy could either adapt to this new reality or be left behind by it. The holographic display changed to show the human fleet in the void between galaxies. Hundreds of massive ships that were each the size of small moons moved in perfect formation through space that contained no stars or planets. The vessels glowed with their own light and seemed to bend space around them in ways that made alien scientists question everything they thought they knew about the universe. But the most shocking revelation was that these ships were not just vehicles, but complete civilizations. Each one contained millions of humans, living in cities that were more advanced and beautiful than anything that existed on any planet. The ships could create their own matter from quantum fluctuations, generate unlimited energy from the fabric of space itself, and travel instantly across any distance. The alien delegates realized they were not just looking at superior technology, but at an entirely new form of existence. Humanity had become something that no longer needed planets or star systems or the approval of other species. They had transformed themselves into beings of pure possibility who could reshape reality according to their will. As the display faded, Jinuk delivered his final message. The 72-hour deadline was not negotiable, and the choice was simple: accept humanity offer of partnership and relocation to better worlds, or refuse and discover what happened to species that chose conflict over cooperation. The human ambassador walked back to his ship without waiting for questions or responses. The vessel began to glow brighter and then simply vanished from the chamber, leaving behind only empty air and hundreds of alien delegates who finally understood that everything had changed. Forever in the silence that followed, each species representative frantically contacted their home governments to report what they had witnessed. Some recommended immediate acceptance of the human offer, while others called for desperate military resistance, but all of them knew that the old galaxy was ending and something entirely new was about to begin. The alien delegates refused to believe what they had witnessed in the council chamber. They convinced themselves that the holographic display had been an elaborate trick designed to frighten them into submission. The Sectar Empire was the first to take action, launching a massive fleet to challenge what they assumed was nothing more than human bluffing and deception. Admiral Keshtar commanded the largest war fleet in Sectar history. 200 of their most powerful warships accelerated toward their home system, where the mysterious human vessels had been detected. The admiral was confident that superior numbers and firepower would expose humanity weakness and restore the proper order to the galaxy. The Sectar ships were impressive examples of galactic military technology. Each vessel was over a kilometer long, armed with weapons that could destroy planets and protected by shields that had never been penetrated in centuries of warfare. The fleet represented the combined might of an empire that had conquered dozens of star systems. From the bridge of the human vessel Harmony, Captain Kim Minjung watched the approaching alien fleet with something that looked like sadness rather than concern. She was a woman in her 40s, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy ugliness. She had hoped that this demonstration would not be necessary. The Harmony itself was unlike any warship the galaxy had ever seen. It was smaller than most of the Sectar vessels, but it seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. The hull appeared solid, but sensors could not determine what materials it was made from. The ship generated no heat signature, no electromagnetic emissions, and no gravitational disturbance. Captain Minjung activated her communication system and sent a message directly to Admiral Keshtar, offering his fleet one final opportunity to withdraw. She explained that humanity did not want to harm anyone, but they would defend themselves if attacked. Her voice was calm and regretful, as if she were apologizing for something that had not yet happened. The Sectar admiral responded with contempt and fury. He accused the humans of cowardice and trickery. He declared that the Sectar Empire would never bow to an inferior species that relied on illusions instead of honest combat. He ordered his entire fleet to open fire with every weapon they possessed. The barrage that followed was incredible to witness. 200 warships launched thousands of missiles and energy beams that would have been enough to destroy an entire planet. The space around the Harmony filled with explosions and radiation that should have vaporized any normal vessel, but the human ship simply sat motionless in the middle of the firestorm as every attack passed through it without effect. The Harmony existed in a state of quantum superposition that made it immune to normal matter and energy. The alien weapons were trying to destroy something that was not entirely there. Admiral Keshtar stared at his instruments in disbelief as they reported that every shot had missed the target despite being fired at point-blank range. His weapons officers confirmed that their targeting systems were working perfectly, but the human ship seemed to be phasing in and out of existence. What happened next became legend throughout the galaxy and changed the way every species thought about power and possibility. Captain Minjung did not return fire or attempt to destroy the alien fleet. Instead, she demonstrated humanity's true capabilities in a way that no one could deny or forget. Sectar homeworld simply disappeared from its orbit around their star. One moment it was there, spinning peacefully with its billions of inhabitants going about their daily lives. The next moment it was gone, leaving behind only empty space and the confused remains of the alien defense fleet. For several terrifying seconds, Admiral Keshtar and his officers believed that humanity had destroyed their entire world and everyone on it. But then their communication systems began receiving impossible messages from Sectar Prime, reporting that the planet was fine and that something amazing had happened. The homeworld had been relocated to a completely different star system, one with 2 perfect yellow suns and 3 beautiful moons. The transition had been so smooth that most of the population had not even noticed it happening. Weather patterns remained stable. Cities continued functioning normally, and transportation networks had automatically adapted to the new stellar configuration, but The improvements to their world were immediately obvious. The two suns provided more light and energy than their old star agricultural regions were already showing increased crop yields due to the improved solar radiation. The three moons created tidal patterns that enhanced ocean currents and made the climate more pleasant. Advanced materials had been integrated into every building and structure on the planet, making them stronger, more efficient, and more beautiful. The air was cleaner, the water was purer, and even the gravity had been slightly adjusted to reduce stress on the population. Technology throughout the world had been upgraded to levels that would have taken the sector centuries to achieve on their own. Admiral Keshtar fleet found itself floating in the empty space where their homeworld used to be. Their navigation systems had gone completely haywire, unable to determine their location or plot courses to destinations that no longer existed in the same places. Their communications filled with reports from the relocated planet describing wonders beyond imagination. The demonstration was complete, and its message was clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity had transcended the normal limitations of space-time and matter. They were no longer bound by the rules that governed other forms of life. They could reshape reality itself. According to their will, news of the sector relocation spread through galactic communication networks. Within hours, alien governments that had been preparing for war suddenly found themselves reconsidering their positions. Some species immediately began evacuation procedures, trusting that humanity would improve their worlds as promised. The Velfi Collective was among the first to accept the human offer. Their energy-based existence made them more capable of understanding the quantum manipulation technology that humanity had mastered. They recognized that resistance was not just futile, but completely meaningless. Other species attempted to hide their populations in distant star systems or underground bunkers, hoping to avoid human attention. But the relocated monitoring stations that had been tracking the sector fleet reported that human vessels were appearing throughout the galaxy. The ships were not threatening, but they were everywhere. The Hyvern swarm tried to negotiate, pointing out that they had voted against the original ultimatum and should not be subject to relocation, but humanity's response was simple and direct. The offer applied to all species, regardless of their previous positions, because the old system had failed and needed to be completely replaced. A few species prepared for desperate last stands, believing that death was preferable to accepting human dominance. But even their preparations were quietly sabotaged as their weapon systems began malfunctioning, and their military communications networks experienced mysterious failures. The galaxy was learning that humanity had moved beyond the need for conquest or domination. They were offering transformation and improvement, but they were also making it clear that the choice was not really optional. The old order was ending, whether individual species accepted it or not. Captain Kim Min-jung sat in her command chair watching reports from across the galaxy as the great transformation began. She felt no satisfaction in humanity demonstration of power, only sadness that it had been necessary. The galaxy had forced them to become something they had never wanted to be, but there was also hope in the reports coming back from the relocated worlds. The sector population was already adapting to their improved planet, and early surveys suggested that other species would experience similar benefits. The galaxy was about to become a much better place, even if the process was not entirely voluntary. The age of limitations and fear was ending, and the age of infinite possibility was about to begin. Humanity had left the galaxy as refugees, but they were returning as gardeners ready to cultivate a new type of civilization that would make the old conflicts seem like children arguing over toys. The demonstration was over, but the real work was just beginning. Word of the sector relocation spread through the galaxy faster than light itself, traveling through communication networks that connected every inhabited world within hours. The reaction was immediate and dramatic as species governments realized that everything they thought they knew about power and politics had changed overnight. Some alien civilizations immediately began evacuation procedures after seeing the improvements that humanity had made to the sector homeworld. The reports coming back from the relocated planet described technological advances that would have taken centuries to achieve naturally, and environmental improvements that made life better for every inhabitant. The Velfi Collective was among the first to request Relocation, their energy-based existence, allowed them to understand the quantum principles behind humanity technology better than most species. They recognized that human capabilities were not just advanced, but represented a completely new understanding of how the universe worked. Other species attempted to flee to distant galaxies or hide their populations in remote star systems, hoping to avoid human attention altogether. But the monitoring networks that tracked these movements reported that human vessels were appearing everywhere, often in places that should have been impossible to reach. The Wiper gas creatures tried to negotiate, pointing out that their species had always been peaceful and had never threatened humanity, but the human response was consistent across all communications. The transformation would include everyone because the old system of competition and limitation had proven itself incapable of creating lasting peace. A few warrior species prepared for desperate final battles, believing that death in combat was preferable to accepting what they saw as human dominance. But even their preparations were quietly undermined as weapon systems began converting themselves into peaceful technologies and military installations. Transformed into research facilities, the Galactic Council met for what everyone knew would be the last time in its original form. Chairman Mordick called the emergency session, but his authority had evaporated like mist in sunlight. The Great Hall, that had once been the center of galactic power, now felt like a museum displaying artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. Ambassador Lee Jinyuk returned to address the chaos, but this time he brought companions. Dr. Troy Minsu represented humanity's scientific achievements, while Captain Hanjisu spoke for their capabilities in space. The three humans stood calmly in the center of the chamber while hundreds of alien delegates argued, shouted, and pleaded around them. The humans waited patiently for the noise to die down before explaining the new reality that the galaxy would have to accept. Humanity no longer sought membership in any council or recognition as equals among many species. They had evolved beyond such concerns and were now offering something entirely different. Species that chose to embrace growth, cooperation, and unlimited possibility would become partners in creating a new type of civilization. Those who preferred the old ways of limitation, competition, and fear would be relocated to suitable worlds where they could continue their traditional existence without interfering with others. Those few species that chose aggression would discover that their weapons had been transformed into tools of creation and exploration, their warships converted into research vessels, and their military installations changed into centers of learning and cultural exchange. The choice was theirs, but the transformation would happen regardless. The process began immediately. Across the entire galaxy, war fleets that had been preparing for battle against humanity found their weapon systems replaced overnight with terraforming equipment, scientific instruments, and manufacturing facilities designed to improve rather than destroy. Military bases became research centers where scientists from different species worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system of secrecy and competition. Cultural exchange programs replaced intelligence networks as species learned to share knowledge instead of hoarding it. The most dramatic changes happened on worlds that had been designated as fortress planets. These heavily armed strongholds transformed into gardens of incredible beauty, with cities that seemed to grow from the landscape itself rather than being imposed upon it. The weapons that had once defended them became the tools that created paradise. Within 6 months, the galaxy was completely transformed. Dozens of species that had been enemies for centuries were working together on projects that expanded the boundaries of science, art, and philosophy. New worlds bloomed with life and star systems that had been empty voids. Technologies that had been suppressed by the old limitations were now flourishing openly. The quantum manipulation techniques that humanity had mastered were shared freely with any species that demonstrated the wisdom to use them responsibly. Planets were relocated to optimal positions around perfect stars. Asteroid belts were converted into ring worlds that supported billions of inhabitants. Solar systems were redesigned to maximize both beauty and functionality, but the most profound change was in how the different species related to each other. The old patterns of dominance and submission were replaced by cooperation based on each civilization's unique strengths. The Hivran became master engineers. The Velthi specialized in energy systems. The Sectar developed new forms of Art and music. Humanity watched this transformation from their mobile cities in the void between galaxies, no longer bound to any single star system or region of space. They had become something entirely new, a species that existed everywhere and nowhere, simultaneously capable of reshaping reality according to their vision of what life could become. The generation ships that carried human civilization had evolved as well, becoming vast networks of interconnected vessels that could span multiple galaxies while maintaining perfect communication and coordination. Children born in these mobile worlds grew up with capabilities that would have seemed godlike to earlier generations. Dr. Choi Min-soo, now over 100 years old but kept young by human medical advances, continued his research into the fundamental nature of existence. His discoveries allowed humanity to create matter from pure energy, design new forms of life, and even manipulate time itself on small scales. Captain Han Jisu commanded fleets that explored regions of space beyond the visible universe, discovering new dimensions of reality and forms of existence that challenged every assumption about what life could become. The boundaries between science and magic had become meaningless. The old diplomacy had indeed ended, but what emerged in its place was far greater than anyone had imagined. The galaxy no longer shook with fear, but trembled with the excitement of unlimited growth and possibility every day brought new discoveries, new achievements, and new reasons to hope for an even better future. Species that had spent millions of years locked in the same patterns of behavior suddenly found themselves capable of growth and change that transformed them into something greater. The universe itself seemed to expand in response to this new civilization that refused to accept limitations. Humanity had left the galaxy as refugees driven out by fear and misunderstanding, but they returned as gardeners of reality itself, cultivating new forms of life and consciousness that would make the old conflicts seem like distant memories from a less enlightened age. The transformation was complete, but it was also just the beginning, because in a universe of infinite possibility, every ending was also a new start, and every achievement opened doors to even greater wonders. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed. From their mobile cities, humanity looked out at the universe they had helped to